welcome to Waypoint, the AirMed&Rescue podcast, your place to hear all about the latest news and insights from professionals in the airborne special missions sector. My guest this week is Michael Benton, founder of VyClimb. This man is absolutely dedicated to the enhancement, development and promotion of aviation safety. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with you, could you share a little bit of your professional background? Where have you worked in the world? In what capacities? And then what was it about your experiences that made you want to start VyClimb?
Sure. Yeah, prior to being in the aviation industry, I was a U.S. Army Korean linguist and interrogator many years ago. Eventually became an OH-58D Kiowa Warrior Air Cavalry armed reconnaissance pilot. A brief kind of funny thing there is it was an excused absence from Korean class to go learn about the warrant officer aviation program. And I thought, well, might as well take an excuse to get out of, sitting in a classroom and learning Korean all day long, because it was pretty intense. And that kind of changed my direction. So after being in the Army as an instructor pilot, standardization pilot, and master gunner, I got out and worked aeromedical. I worked as a pilot in command with MedTrans Corporation, flying the 407 in Colorado, and then eventually moved over to Air Methods, where I was an instructor pilot, check airman, and then my last position there was as the director of compliance. So for that role, the communication centers, operations control centers, and accident investigation fell under me.
Wow, so that's a big switch over to AirMed side. Did you enjoy the AirMed side more than learning Korean in a classroom, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. The Korean language school was out in Monterey, California. So, it's a lot of distraction, from being able to focus on what we were supposed to focus on. And, flying in the Army was, it was fun. Of course, it has its positives and negatives, a lot of deployments. But it felt good, really, to get out of the military and then join that kind of public service role in the aeromedical industry. Yeah, for sure.
And then VyClimb Consulting was founded in 2015?
Yes. I had, had gone back to school, finished an MBA, and actually, interesting point, my wife worked with me at Air Methods. So we would commute back and forth to work every single day and kind of talk about, what the future might look like. And I really had a passion for safety, kind of compliance and mentoring. And it was really Linda that encouraged me to leave the corporate life, I guess you could say, and start my own company. Yeah, coming up on 10 years now, which is exciting.
So part of your role with VyClimb, and what other organizations do you have involvement with in the US?
Yeah. So I can maybe talk briefly about what we do at VyClimb first. So it's really an operations, safety, and business consulting company, working generally with the aviation industry, but really our passion and our specialization is with aeromedical. As part of that, I serve as a board member for CAMS. It's the Commission on Accreditation for Medical Transport Systems. I'm sure some of your listeners, particularly in the North America area, would know about that.
I think a lot of people know Eileen. She's done wonderful work.
We'd be remiss without thanking her for, founding CAMS. And I'm sure she's retiring. Actually, now retired. She retired this January. So, she's going to be missed for sure in CAMS. I also work as a board advisor for NIMSA, which is in the U.S. is the National EMS Pilots Association. Yeah, they're working hard to, kind of build the value and advocate for aeromedical service pilots here in the U.S. Yeah, recently I became an ambassador and a mentor with Fred North's Helicopter Safety Mentorship Program. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. What does that involve?
Yeah, so it was just recently launched. I'd say in the last couple of months, you probably saw some press releases for it. But Fred North, you may know, is a well-known aerial filming pilot.
Okay.
Pretty big following on social media, been in a lot of big movies. But he actually started a helicopter safety mentorship program. That's basically the goal is to provide confidential connections between mentors and mentees. Mentees are all going to be, new in the aviation industry, young pilots, and someone they can talk to, if they're unsure about their career path, or if maybe they're involved in an incident or an accident. Somebody who's, I'd like to say, has some gray hair, maybe, is a little bit older, maybe experienced and been through those same types of scenarios in the past. Yeah, so it's pretty great. I've got a couple
Yeah.
of mentees right now, and was just recently made an ambassador of the program. So now that means I try to promote it to the industry. I think
Awesome.
he's planning on doing a little bit more of a public launch about that at the upcoming Verticon. We also work pretty closely with AIMS, the Association of Air Medical Services, lectured at their graduate level courses for their Medical Transport Leadership Institute, as well as their SMS Training Academy. And as you can see, like with that, again, that passion I mentioned of training and educating around safety. In the past, I've instructed at the NTSB's helicopter accident investigation course.
And we'll come back to the NTSB side later when we're discussing some recent events. But
Yeah, absolutely. Invitational speaker at a few events, Heli Expo, formerly Heli Expo, now Verticon, CHD Safety Summit, AirMed World Congress a few years back in Poland. Pretty busy advocating.
Pretty
for
busy.
safety.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
Yeah.
You're a man in demand, absolutely. So now we that's you, the individual. So now VyClimb. So tell us what the company does and what services you're offering.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned before, operations, safety, and business advising, we've kind of evolved over the last 10 years. Initially, we started out maybe more of an interim leadership role. So an organization has a short notice gap in, say, their aviation leadership team. They could bring us in to help fill that role while they look for the permanent replacement. But it's evolved.
That's difficult. That's really difficult to do.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And I think that what's neat about it is every project that we do, we've been more valuable in a sense because we've now seen another example of how someone else does it, right?
Sure.
As I'm sure you're familiar with, the regulations are generally, they're very prescriptive, right? They tell you how to do something, but the way that you get to the end goal, it just varies, right? Varies by the organization. So yeah, every project that we do, we learn a little bit more from that operator, and we can bring some of that experience and knowledge to the next one. But it's evolved. It seems like of late, the last few years, most of our projects we've been working as advisors to the senior leadership teams, the CEOs of, say, these health systems, or even the board of directors. Because often those organizations, they may have a huge trauma center and satellite hospitals and ground ambulances and all of those other operations. And then over here in the corner, they have this, Part 135 certificate here in the U.S. with maybe 8 aircraft. And it provides a level of comfort for the CEO or board of directors to have somebody outside the organization come in, assess the organization, give them some recommendations to enhance, and then stay and help implement if they need it.
Yeah. As you say, I think sometimes when people are too close to their own organization, they don't always see where efficiencies or enhancements could be made. So it takes coming in with fresh eyes, and also those fresh eyes, as you say, that have seen how other people have done it. And you take that example and you can implement it somewhere else to really affect positive change.
Yeah. And it's, we call it like the phrase, the low-hanging fruit. Is often you come in and you kind of hit those quick and get some early wins, some quick successes. And like you said, it's the problem is, or the challenge is that when they're so close to it, it's the way they've always done it.
Yeah.
And it works. So they're like, why do we want to change it? Why do we want to make extra work to change something, right? And we're always big to say that, what we recommend, we're not ever recommending what we think is necessarily this is the best way to do it. It's just a different way. Because it may be best for this organization in California, but not the best way to do it for another organization in, say, Western Australia, right? It's a very different set of circumstances for both.
Sure. And when it comes to the crews that you're working with in there, what do you do on the sort of with the personnel on the front line?
Yeah, that's, I think, maybe one of the things that makes us a little more unique. And I think probably every consulting company says they're unique, right? But I think what makes us a little unique is we're not afraid to take the time to spend one-on-one time with individual crew members. Okay. So if we're doing a full assessment of an organization, it's nearly impossible to get 100% of staff, but we'll spend quite a bit of time one-on-one with line staff, right? So everywhere from maintenance technicians to clinicians, pilots, winch operator or hoist operators, to really hear their input. Because what we're trying to do is measure, we have kind of a quantitative and qualitative set of questions that we go through. Yeah. And the leadership team at the highest level, they get the same questions that we ask even the lowest level staff. Right. And what we're trying to illustrate is if there's a gap, right? So a great example is morale. If you ask all of the leadership team and they say morale is 5 out of 5. It's as good as it can ever be. You can imagine when you go to the line level, you may not get that same response. You may get
Sure.
2.5. So we dig deeper on that and provide that feedback back to the leadership team with recommendations on making it better. I think one thing that's important is whenever we do these projects, I'd say one of our most important principles is about confidentiality. So right from the beginning, if we're having negotiations on a contract with, say, a CEO, is we just tell them straight out, look, if you ask who said something, then you're not in the right mindset to fix this, right? Because this isn't about individual, issues. Of course, if we come across something criminal or just, imminently dangerous, high level of risk, we're going to bring that up. But we de-identify everything as much as possible.
Yeah, because you need the leaders to be accountable for it, but you don't need the employees necessarily to be accountable for how they're feeling about a particular aspect of the company.
That's a great way to put it, because whether or not it's reality, if that's what they're experiencing, the stress, the trauma, the drama, if there's not much flying happening, that's their reality. So the last thing we want is to report something back with a solution and have a leadership team that's like, I don't believe that, or that's just them complaining. It's like, well, they're complaining for a reason. There's something is amiss. And when you mentioned accountability, that's another thing that we do that initially gets some wide eyes from these high level leadership teams. But when we put together the final report of our assessments, one of the things that we insist is going to happen is we don't just brief the results to the leadership team, but we brief the exact same results to every single member of the line staff. And the reason why is because the line staff can then see the recommendations, the positives, the negatives, and they can then hold the leadership team accountable, because now everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows where the gaps are. Now, we're not saying that the leadership team has to move forward and fix every single one of those things, but at a minimum, they should address each. Because there's a chance they see a recommendation and they say that just won't work for us. It's too expensive, or it's not aligned with our strategic vision for whatever reason. And the staff at the line level, they need to know kind of where leadership's coming from.
Absolutely. Everyone that's in an organization like Aeromedical Transfers, they're all stakeholders in every single part of it, from the mechanic to the CEO.
Yeah.
You should have a say in, especially when it comes to safety. One of the things that you've been heavily involved with are line operations safety audits in the helicopter industry. Now, some of our listeners may not be, totally up to date with LOSA. Could you explain a bit more about what this really involves from like an operator's point of view? Who can benefit from it? What do you gain from an audit like that? Because audit is a scary word for operators, right?
Yeah.
So what do you get from it?
Okay. Yeah. So line operations safety audit. So first of all, this is something that's been published and really came about from James Kleinecht at the LOSA Collaborative. I'm not sure if I'm sure a lot of your viewers have heard of James, but he built this as part of his doctorate project for the University of Texas in Austin. They like to say, kind of in simple terms, it's like a health check or a cholesterol check of your operation, right? It's a deep dive into what normal is at your organization, right? So it's basically a snapshot in time of an operation and daily, so it's not check rides, it's not training, it's just whatever you're routinely doing. So if we're talking about air medical transport, these are flights where you have an observer on board the aircraft who's been trained in LOSA methodologies and threat and error management, and they'll ride along on these flights kind of like a fly on the wall, right? They'll just kind of observe. And the goal is to watch for their normal behavior of the pilots and document a narrative of what that looks like, right? At the end of the observation period, it kind of depends on how many flights you're doing, that type of thing. They're going to take all of those narratives and actually pull out threats and errors and identify, areas of enhancement for each of those types of things. VyClimb doesn't form LOSA. Right. In fact, if someone comes to us looking for LOSA operations, we can either advise them on how to build their own LOSA program internally, or if they can afford it, really the best option, the most comprehensive option, is to do a third-party LOSA with someone like the LOSA Collaborative.
Yeah, I think getting the independent view is so important, isn't it? You can't really audit yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the independent view, but it's the fact that someone like those guys at TLC have the world's largest database of flights, right? So it's one thing to look at yourself and record threats and areas for improvement in your organization. But what's really valuable is to be able to then compare it to others that are similar to you. And what really the benefit, I guess, to answer that question, if you are looking at it, not looking deeply enough, and you say, oh, over here we have this type of error that happens the most often, you would think we should put our resources towards that error and try to fix it because it happens the most often. But what LOSA is going to show you is maybe this error happens a lot, but the outcome of that error isn't as bad as you thought it was. Like maybe it's inconsequential every time it happens. So maybe your resources are better spent at a lower frequency of error somewhere else that has a higher risk or higher negative outcome.
A higher potential impact. I think complacency is the enemy of everything in life, but when it comes to aeromedical transports, it's like you say, it's the normal. What is normal for one organization? And you're in a routine, you know where the hospitals are, you're doing all the inter-hospital transfers, you know the helipads, you know the staff, you know the crews. And not all operators have the same acceptance of what normal levels of safety are.
Yeah.
So having that audit allows it to be measured.
Yeah, and we saw that quite a bit. So in addition, I helped great man, Stephen Ingham with LOSA Collaborative. He was the project lead, the director that was, you could say, converting airline LOSA into helicopter LOSA, right? So it was very specific to the helicopter industry. That's where he and I first met. And, I went around the world with him performing helicopter LOSA projects, mostly offshore. We did some airline work. But what was interesting is, as an external observer, right? Because in LOSA, normally observers are internal pilots, your peers. They might go on a flight in, say, Mexico City, is a great example he always used. And all of the internal observers never recorded high altitude or mountainous terrain as a threat. But it took an external observer, me coming in or whoever, to be on the aircraft, and every single flight we flew were, high altitudes or high DA, mountainous terrain. And when asked that question, the response was usually, well, that's not a threat. We deal with that every day. And you're saying, well, it is a threat. It's still a threat to you. It's still a hazard. It can still cause issues. So like we mentioned in the air medical programs earlier, when you're in something every single day, you just normalize it and you start to just discount it as normal operations.
Which, is a very dangerous game to play. Now, one of the things that you say on the VyClimb website is that you aim to promote communication between all organizations to protect lives and remove safety as a competitive advantage, which I thought was a really interesting way of describing what you do. So in practice, how does this work? Can you tell me any projects that you're working on right now that are examples of this?
Yeah, so through my career, I often heard, we don't compete on safety. So, I can differentiate if I'm running two different air medical companies. Maybe this organization over here touts that they're faster or that their level of care is higher. Maybe they carry, specialty equipment. Maybe their rates are more acceptable, those types of things. I've always agreed with that philosophy from the safety perspective of, if I come up with some technology that's going to make me safer, that if I try to use that to my competitive advantage, then I'm really doing a disservice to everybody else. In other words, if I'm keeping that secret, right? I've figured out the secret to preventing all accidents in the future, right? And I'm just not going to tell anyone because that, everyone's going to hire me. But that's obviously a disservice. So not competing on safety, meaning that if I come up with a safety initiative, a new way to promote safety, a new way to manage risk, I need to share that with as many people as possible, because if everyone else continues to have accidents around me while I'm safely operating accident-free, incident-free, my industry is going to go away regardless, right? I'm not going to be this sole survivor. So really, we constantly push for just greater transparency and communication between all levels. And in practice, really, it can come down to, at the most basic level, just introducing, your counterparts at different organizations. Now, I understand, like, say here in Denver, Colorado, we've got a couple of medical programs that are pretty competitive with each other. And it would be a bit of a stretch to say, hey, I want all of you guys to work together because, the business side of the house is like, that's not okay, right? They can't see you coming and going from each other. So we generally try to connect air medical programs that are opposite sides of the country, right? A great example is we did a bunch of work with Intermountain Health Life Flight and Classic out of Utah, based in the Western US. And I've introduced several of the people from, say, communications and safety over to another client that we've worked with in Michigan, because very unlikely that either one of them is ever going to be in a competitive type environment against each other. So that's really the big piece at the most basic level. We have a few projects kind of in the works. I don't want to give too much detail, but we're trying to come up with a way for that collaboration to work without, Mike and Linda having to get directly involved in the introductions, but a way for them to actually cross-communicate in kind of a confidential space, but also not anonymous. So at least there's, you put a name behind something, people will put more belief into it than if it's an anonymous source. So.
That sort of comes back to your role as the ambassador of the Fred North?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that connecting people and having the personal relationships between the organizations. That's a huge part of it, so that a pilot can pick up the phone to their counterpart and say, hey, this just happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, everywhere I go, if I'm working with, say, directors of operations, chief pilots, it's, I don't want to talk myself out of business, but they all have they all kind of have the same challenges.
Yeah.
And I'm very surprised. We actually have started to see some trends that it seems like at least again here in the US, the operations that have their own Part 135 certificate, we call it like a standalone. So it's maybe a hospital or a nonprofit organization that has its own operating certificate, its own aircraft, obviously, its own pilots, mechanics. And if things are going pretty good, those organizations tend to drift away from things like Verticon or the Air Medical Transport Conference, or just not really talking to each other, because if you think about it, it's like it's just kind of human nature that it's working. I don't really need to change it. Maybe we're still doing our flight paperwork by hand. They may not even be aware that there's digital solutions out there, but what they do works. So why change it? And, it's not, I don't want to, I'm not going to fault them for that, because it's human nature. There's a lot of work. Most people are stretched pretty thin, but we find that those organizations often get the most benefit when you encourage them to network, encourage them to talk to each other. And it benefits everybody, all the way to, the line staff as well.
Well, I mean, I don't think you're going to talk yourself out of business, because 10 years of operations this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You must have seen quite a lot of change. We were just talking about change and the fear of change, but you must have seen a lot of changes in airborne special missions, in HEMS, in airborne policing during the last decade of VyClimb, but also, since you were flying the helicopters. So, I mean, what do you think are the biggest changes that you've seen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the one that always comes to mind, at least maybe because it's more recent, is everything related to COVID.
Yeah.
Right. That was an interesting trajectory. I remember when that first started to get really widespread, there were some operations that their stance was, we're not going to transport COVID patients, period. And if you say that now and you think back to that, you're like, wow, like you're out of business at that point, right? Because at some point, most patients, right? So I think that reminded the businesses that anything can happen. And it really put a lot of stress on the crews, because if you think about it, the additional workload of, suiting up if they were wearing suits, and decontamination of the aircraft, and then just the mental load. And like really, you could say the mental trauma of every patient I have is not just really hurt, but potentially could kill me, right? And I could get COVID fans.
Yeah, scary.
Yeah. So, volumes on that have really picked up now that, COVID's kind of a thing in the past, right? Obviously, it's still out there, but I think we've evolved enough to deal with it. I think
we've
another
lost that
big change,
fear, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways you might well say complacency again, right?
Whether that was a wise choice to lose the fear of COVID, I won't comment on, but that initial real fear of, I don't know how dangerous this is, has gone, right?
Right. Exactly. I think supply chain challenges were pretty big over the years. You see that come and go. Availability of aircraft, things like that has been a big change, because it's forced organizations, at least a lot of the ones I work with, to start planning so much sooner for fleet replacements and aircraft upgrades. We're helping an operation right now try to figure out what their next aircraft's going to be. And, they're ready to switch sooner than later, but you start looking at some of the solutions and the OEMs are telling you, 2027 to get a new aircraft. So that's still a ways out there. And as we all know, often those dates are, end up being later than what you think.
Yes, indeed.
And then I think maybe this is not unique to aeronautical or even special missions, but I think the workforce, so your pilots, your mechanics, your clinicians, and all those people are becoming more mature and understanding what makes an organization safe.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what's happening there is we're seeing those questions come up during, say, an interview, right? So back years ago, when we would interview pilots, they would never ask about the status of your SMS at your organization. But now we're seeing them ask, like, are you guys part of the voluntary program? And now, how close are you to the SMS mandate here with the FAA? So it's good. It's very good because it's requiring these operators to kind of get their act together, because there used to be an assumption that, oh, well, you wouldn't be in operation if you weren't safe. But now the realization is that there are operators out there that are in operation that are not necessarily doing everything the way they should be.
And it's holding those leadership teams accountable again, isn't it? If you are not an employer of choice, you're not going to get the right staff through the door. So that's great that people are asking the questions. Yeah,
or almost said voting with your feet. Maybe, I'm not sure if that's the right phrase, but if they've been in operations where people, there's enough opportunity out there for flying and clinical jobs that if somebody doesn't feel safe in an organization, they'll walk. They'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, safety. There's a lot of aspects to safety. There's culture of an organization, but there's also an element of how much money a company can spend on certain solutions, and that brings us to the impact of technology. There's a lot of, look at cockpits now and how much safer the helicopters are just because of all the avionics on them. For you, is there a single piece of technology that you think is making helicopters safer than they used to be?
Yeah, I'll focus first when you say helicopters in particular. The white phosphorus night vision goggle technology that's out there is a pretty big one. I don't necessarily consider that new necessarily anymore, but it's the
but
resolution.
The transfer from military to civilian for white phosphorus took some time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, white phosphorus technology has been out for a while, but as far as adoption now, and it's interesting because most people do equate spending money with becoming safer. But that doesn't have to be, huge cost expenditures to be safer, right? And I know we're just using this like nebulous term of safety, right? What does that mean? It doesn't cost anything. I mean, I guess eventually it does in people's time, but it doesn't really cost a lot of like capital to be engaged with your staff and your people. The organizations that I would consider some of the quote unquote safest organizations, it was more around the culture. It was more around, all the way at the highest level. And this was a large organization. The highest level, the CEO, he knew people by name. He would go out to the bases, and the safety managers, safety directors cared about their people, and the people on the line knew who they were, right? And they knew that they were engaged. I just wanted to kind of clarify that, right? That you don't have to spend money to identify risk and all that. That's achievable just through caring and empathy and being engaged.
Technology, the MVGs don't come free, sadly.
But back to the question there about the technology, I think to me, this is an example of one that's a small expenditure to improve safety, is the Icorus flight training device.
Okay.
It's basically, back in the day when we would do instrument flight training, you'd stuff a folded up piece of cardboard into the helmet visor or wear the foggles to kind of limit your outside view of the world as much as you could to simulate instrument training. And this Icorus device, I just talk about it quite a bit just because it's such a simple, elegant solution to this, but it's this. I might misspeak, but it's like a plastic device that mounts to the helmet to your face and is controlled through an app. And you can actually adjust the amount of transparency that's in there. So not only does it makes it a little more engaging, makes it more realistic, but it's, you can go from VFR, I can see everything, and you can slowly bring in the weather. So it makes it more realistic and more impactful. I'm pretty sure that they were actually an awardee of that Royal Aeronautical Society, an award for their innovation and design of the product.
As you say, sometimes it is the simplest things that can have a big impact and not for a high cost.
Yeah, and I think it brought some excitement back to instrument training. And if you do look back at some of the accident history, I mean, that we do lose aircraft due to inadvertent IMC conditions and that kind of thing. So, yeah, there's no telling. It's like a lot of safety initiatives. You never know how many accidents you prevented. I think in this case, anybody that's kind of been in the industry from a training perspective can see this and see the value in something that doesn't cost a lot of money in the big picture to save, lives and crew and reputation.
We've talked a lot about safety in this interview. I think just for our listeners, so that you're aware, we are in the beginning of February when we're recording this, and in the last 7 days there have been 2 very high-profile accidents. One Black Hawk into a passenger jet and one CRJ air ambulance in the States. Both very tragic, fatal accidents. Both are being investigated at the moment. We're not going to go into potential speculation about causation, but I mean, Michael, from your perspective, what do you think that the accidents kind of say about the safety rate, the safety culture in the US at the moment?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that it should remind everybody that we still have a long way to go. Right? There's still a lot of work. There's still a lot of work to do. There's still humans in the loop, right? Which can be problematic. I think what's most important about these 2 incidents or accidents in particular is, like with anything, the NTSB, it's a world-class investigation organization, and we need to let them do their job, right? Let them investigate. It takes time. I've been on go teams from the operator perspective, like I mentioned before, teaching at the NTSB, and I think I'm trying to quote unquote say a lot about it by not saying anything about it on the internet right now. I think that's what's probably the most frustrating when these events occur, is to see the chatter that's online of people that really don't have any idea at this point.
The armchair experts are out in force at the moment.
It's honestly, it's disappointing, and I think it hits a little more at home because one of them was air medical, one of them was an Army helicopter pilot, and we don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody will ever know with certainty exactly what happened. But the NTSB, I'm confident, will come to a conclusion that is as close to what really happened as possible. So, yeah.
What needs to change, do you think, so that we can really achieve positive results when it comes to reducing the accident rate?
I think it comes down to an individual level, and I'm not, by no means am I saying that this has anything to do with these last 2 accidents or kind of blame. But I guess what I'm saying is even the organization with the best culture or the most robust flight operation system is not going to prevent somebody's personal shortcomings if they become complacent, have a lapse in attention, poor judgment, anything like that. It's a lofty, you hear a lot of people talk about, the goal of 0 accidents. I mean, the commercial airline world has gotten really close, but it's, to me, almost an unrealistic goal, at least in the short term, right?
Yeah.
I'm not advocating that we take humans out of the aircraft by any stretch. We kind of joke about that sometimes, the clinical crews on shift are like giving the pilots a hard time, saying, what do you think about, you're going to be out of a job someday. And I just look at them and say, so you're telling me you're comfortable hopping in the back of a piloted, but wait a minute. I'm like, yeah, you're going to be in it. So exactly. Anyway, I just think that
we can't even do driverless taxis safely yet. So,
Yeah, it's a little ways away. I just think that what it comes down to, that probably the most impactful way to reduce accidents is for every individual that's involved, whatever their role is, clinical, maintenance, pilots, to, fight complacency, stay focused. Don't, every day is a new day, right? I don't know. I wish there was something more tangible to fix in that situation. But, whenever you go back and look at accidents and incidents, it's hard not to, trying to think how to word this. It's hard not to look at it and say, at some point along this, somebody could have broken this chain of events by speaking up. Mm-hmm. And whether it may not even be that crew that's in that aircraft on that day, but it could have been a leader or a manager or a regulator who saw something that didn't look right and could have spoken up and said, this sounds like a bad idea. Right. So.
I think that's such an important part of what you do is you can be that voice. VyClimb can come in and see an organization and ask the questions of, well, why do you do it like that? And what about, have you considered change? And so that role it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I think it's what you just hit on it. We joke it's the consulting magic, right? I've come in before as a third party and pointed something out, and the leadership teams often are like, wow, that's an amazing observation. We're going to fix that. And they jump on it and they fix it immediately. And then I have a chief pilot walk up and say, man, I've been talking about that same problem for 6 months and nobody listens to me. And so I actually had part of that as my in brief to the teams that I'm working with. And I say, guys and gals, like, look, I might bring up recommendations or things that you've been trying to do for months or years, and they're going to jump all over it and they get excited. Like, don't take that personally. It's not you. It's just human nature because it's somebody from the outside.
Yeah.
Let's just be happy that we're finally getting the change and the improvement and actually get it done. So in that case, I say, let's turn it around. And what are those things that you think don't look right? If you bring those up to us now, then, we can package it into a way that a senior leader, non-aviation person can resonate with. If that means attaching dollar signs to it or man hours, anything like that, we're able to translate the needs of the line into a language that the leadership can understand.
Absolutely. And sometimes you do need a translator in these situations.
Yeah.
So, amazing. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really interesting talking to you, finding out about the company. And also just in general, we AirMed&Rescue, we are all about promoting safety in this industry. And we share the concerns of everybody who operates. We want everybody who takes off in those helicopters and in those jets to come back safely. And that's the ultimate goal. So thank you so much for everything that you do. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's it for this episode of Waypoint. Thanks to Michael Benton for his time today, and don't forget you can visit vyclimb.com for more information about the resources available to organisations seeking to enhance the safety of their airborne operations. Safe flying! See you next time on Waypoint.